In 8 years since 9/11, air safety has been an area of great concern. But are we any safer? What new policies, technologies, and procedures exist to ensure our safety? What is the acceptable balance between personal freedoms and national security? And what responsibilities do we as individuals have to ensure safer and more convenient air travel? Tonight we explore the new world of air travel safety. I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Again, the story dominates the headlines, terror in the air, with coverage of everything from erratic behavior to illegal entrance to protected areas to hidden body bombs, altogether creating a very worried and very nervous flying community. The media gives them clever names, the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, but there is nothing lighthearted about what their actions lead to. It has been 8 years since 9/11, and millions of dollars have been spent to make air travel safer. New procedures and technologies have been introduced, and new organizational structures have been laid out. Everything has been done to diminish the chance of a terrorist attack. No more nail clippers and carry-on luggage, the removal of our shoes when we go through security, and now the installation of full-body scanners that leave nothing to the imagination. But in this pursuit of safer travel, are we really safer today? What freedoms and rights have we given up in our quest for terror-free travel? And has the price we've paid been worth it? Joining us tonight are Sandy Wall, Director of Training, Safariland, Inc., Jeffrey Korn, Associate Professor of Law, South Texas College of Law, and Frank Haley, Chief Operating Officer, Houston Airports. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
I guess the question posed right at the top, which is where we should begin, is, are we safer today than we were on 9/11?
I think the answer is absolutely yes. Pre-9/11, the FAA ran security. They ran it very well. Certainly when 9/11 happened, several eyes were opened. I think we had a rude awakening, if you will, that our security, although good, wasn't as good as it needed to be. And I think since that time, Department of Homeland Security has been born. The TSA spawned from that. And we've had rules and regulations that have been passed that have made us very, very safe.
Absolutely. And if you think about the terrorist, they only have to get lucky once, and God knows how many times there have been attempts, or they were thwarted, or actually there was a resistance because of they knew the installations and the processes that were in place. So we don't know how many attempts have happened out there that never came to pass because of the things that are in place now.
Well, and you also look at the techniques that do occur in these incidents. I mean, there is a good. It's reasonable to conclude that trying to implant an explosive in an operative's underwear is a reflection of the reality that the enemy knows they can't get these bombs on board the way historically they have, like in the Lockerbie case, or even get people on board who are going to have access to the cockpit. So every time you increase the difficulty of achieving an objective, they have to figure out some alternate means to bring down a plane.
But see, then that brings up the question for me, aren't we just playing catch-up always? Okay, so they did it this way this time, so we're going to put a bunch of regulations to stop it, but they've already moved on to the next way they're going to try. And we're not on top of it until they try that. Then we try this next one. So aren't we always one step behind?
Well, with every measure, there's a countermeasure. I mean, if you look at the military overseas fighting the battle right now for us, every procedure they put in place to address a particular obstacle they're coming up, or a threat, the bad guys are over there watching that, and they're coming up with a countermeasure.
Sandy's exactly right. The thing that happens, though, is we try to be proactive in second-guessing, if you will, as to what they might try. And I think that the layered approach we have to security today covers many different facets that the public doesn't see. And rightfully so. The public doesn't need to see all the things that go on behind the scenes. But I think you'll find that that question does get asked a lot, and it gets asked of the professionals that deal with this every day. And I think that that's one of our challenges, to constantly try to anticipate what they might anticipate that we might do. It is a measures, countermeasures type environment.
But I think that it's also true that, and this is in fact the basic paradigm of any conflict, you're always attempting to figure out your enemy's tactics so you can identify what they're not looking for. But with a terrorist threat, I think they also recognize that if they attempt something and it fails, then what they've worked on they've just lost the efficacy of that. So they know now that they've got a problem if they thought this was going to be the way that they can bring down a plane, because we've now discovered it. And in that regard, the randomness of security measures creates deterrence. We have to always make the opponent wonder what we're looking for and how we're looking for it, because they don't want to take the risk of getting exposed before they achieve their objective.
Right.
But there's no question that when you're dealing with this, there's going to be an element of cat and mouse.
Okay, and talking about the cat and mouse element, I want to go to the fact that there are procedures in place that should have caught this, especially, we'll take, for example, the underwear bombing guy. As I understand, he purchased a one-way ticket. He purchased it with cash. It was for a transatlantic flight. He had no luggage. He was going to Detroit without a winter coat or any kind of heavy clothing. He had no passport. He had a valid visa, and he was on a watch list. So, okay, now we put in body scanners to stop it. If we had just used procedures we had in place, couldn't we have stopped it?
There's no question. I think everyone has admitted that, yes, that's one of those triggers should have been enough to have questioned. As to why it didn't happen, I really can't speak to that because I don't know. I think that's one of those unknowns. Anytime you deal with a technology and you deal with people, technology is fallible. People are fallible.
Right.
In this case,
and I don't bring it up to lay blame on anyone.
Right, I
but
understand.
To say we have policies in place. If we adhere to what we have, do we need all the new regulations we keep adding? Because if they had been enforced, this wouldn't have happened.
Right, and we're relying sometimes on personnel or security personnel that are in other countries. But they're screening people that are coming into our country.
Right.
But security is always, there's a redundancy to security. And if an event like this inspires or stimulates the policymakers to revisit the layers of redundancy and say, hey, we can have the best screening criteria in the world, but if human failure or human error lets somebody by, is our next layer of redundancy sufficient? And then they take a hard look at the individual screening, the luggage screening, and technology. Has technology moved in a direction that can facilitate this redundancy? So in a sense, maybe it's the failure, there's a silver lining to the gray cloud, because it motivates a reassessment of this layered approach, and then then that gets you into the question of the cost-benefit analysis of, in recognition that there's always a risk that somebody's going to get by, is it worth the cost of taking the next level of security up to a new level?
Yeah. And what do you think? Is it worth the cost?
What's human life worth? I mean,
well, I think there is a cost consideration, because obviously, although you would assume we have deep pockets for this sort of thing, we have adequate sums of money. I don't know that we have as much money as we need, but I do know that that the Congress is looking at that today. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee from the 18th District here had a press conference at Intercontinental Airport shortly after the Christmas Eve event, and she pledged that they would be looking carefully at this. They're going to have hearings, and I think they're going to be calling in the airport directors. I know our interim director, Eric Potts, potentially will be going to Washington, D.C. to talk to her committee about what improvements we might be looking for.
I just want to say real quick in here, when you say the Christmas Eve, that's also the underwear bomber.
The underwear bomber, yes.
So our audience knows. I don't want them to get confused and say, is there another event?
No, there was nothing. That's the only one I know of.
I think it's important to recognize that cost is not just financial cost. Of course, there's the financial cost of additional security equipment. The full-body scanner obviously won't be a cheap piece of equipment, and that's going to cost the government money. There's also transaction costs. I mean, if it makes the ease of travel more difficult, then you create frustration among the travelers. There's a potential cost in a sense of a greater loss of personal freedom or individual privacy. One of the public is well aware that these full-body scanners provide a TSA screener a fairly clear view of what you have under your clothing. And then there's the flip side of that is, if you don't increase security, then you run the risk of a cost of the loss of confidence of the public in their government's ability to keep them safe. So there's a much more complex equation of cost, I think, than simply spend more money and get more equipment.
Okay, here's a frustration of mine now. So you mentioned the body scanners, and we've talked about those. I don't know if you can call them an X-ray machine, but it's a machine that can look through your clothing and
Right.
see anything that's on your person. And one of the problems with that is it can see everything that is on your person.
Yes.
So then you hear that one of the things to do to make people feel more secure and not feel so exposed and vulnerable is that there's I don't know if it's a metal sheet that you can put down the front of your pants as a privacy guard, so that, and they show that on the television of people getting their body scanned, but that's blacked out. But the problem being that the underwear bomber had his explosives in the same region we're giving out something to protect ourselves with. Do we get lost in what is our personal freedom and what is truly secure? Are we so worried people will be offended that we're really not going the full...
Well, it's my understanding, I had not heard of the metal shield
like a
you're referring
copper thing
to,
or something.
but it's my understanding that you can refuse the full body scan, but then you will go through a full pat-down and that sort of thing. So I think that there are alternatives to the full body scan, although it appears to be very effective.
And you went through one, Sandy, right?
Absolutely, and it picked up a little small eye drop bottle on me that nothing else would have picked up. And now, having said that, law enforcement's been dealing with this for years. A cop out patting down a suspect after he's handcuffed. The one place he doesn't like to stick his hand is down in the person's groin, and so the bad guys know that. That's where they hide the dope.
Right.
So this is nothing new, and this is what the bad guys overseas. They're not stupid people. And they know the one place that we're vulnerable, where we don't want someone going to and looking at, is in that area of your body. So that's where they put the munitions. It's just common sense.
Now, you were saying that you'd been at the Israeli airport.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, their record is very good of not having any problems over there. But they've given up a lot to get to that point.
Well, I've heard since the Christmas underwear bomber incident, I've heard quite a few comments on the media, basically, well, if the Israelis can do it so effectively, why can't we be like them? But I think the analogy is a bit false. I have been through Ben Gurion Airport many times, and in fact, you don't feel that you're subjected to a tremendous amount of security. But they have one major international airport. How many do we have? They have one major port of entry and port of exit. They have some small regional airports, but virtually every major flight coming or going from Israel is coming from Ben Gurion Airport. They also have a society that doesn't come close to matching our society in terms of diversity, in terms of ethnic, racial, religious diversity. They don't have nearly the population or transit of international visitors as we have. And I think most importantly, and I say this without in any way trying to offend anybody who might be from Israel, I think the cultural narrative of Israel has always recognized they are in a conflict between one distinct group, and that means that they are going to accept as a part of their social narrative that there's going to be heightened scrutiny of members of that group all the time. That's not our narrative. In fact, there are many experts who say one of the reasons that we have been successful in our struggle against terrorism is that our law enforcement intelligence agencies have been very effective in cultivating sources from within the community that might breed some of these homegrown terrorists. And part of that is because members of that community feel that they are included and respected by the government itself. So to adopt the Israeli model is not just as simple as, well, look what the Israelis do, we can do the same thing. I think it's much more complicated.
Yeah. What happens with our personal freedoms then? I'm thinking as soon as you would start approaching it, and almost in a sense they're profiling themselves, as soon as we look to a group, we have problems in this country with all of a sudden people reacting as it's on our rights, it's our civil liberties, you're going against it. Is there a balance we can find in there that keeps us safe but doesn't alter the fabric of our society?
Well, since 9/11, the Department of Justice guidance to federal law enforcement and security agencies has been fairly, I think, reasonable. And their position has been, we're not going to adopt just a blanket profiling policy. But if there is some credible evidence that there's a threat emanating from a certain region of the world or a certain area where there's a distinct ethnic group, then it's appropriate for security to raise their focus or increase their focus on members that seem to match that profile. And it's a cause-based trigger. Whenever you move away from a cause-based trigger, you run two, I think, significant risks. One is you alienate more people than you're going to get benefit from. And the second is that you announce or you publicize to your enemy exactly what your focus is, and you take away the randomness that creates deterrence.
And coming from a law enforcement background, it's the same thing that happens on the street every day. You got cops out there riding, and they're viewing and monitoring the general public, and everyone just comes and goes, and it's all based on probable cause. And all of a sudden, something comes to his attention that's not right, and he cues in on that person. And based on what he perceives and the amount of reasonableness that he should have, then he either acts or doesn't act based on what he thinks is happening.
I think the reality is that we don't look at a person's where they're from, who they are. We really are looking at their behavior. I think that certain behaviors that provide certain triggers, and I think that's what you're going to see. If you want to call that profiling, that's the extent we do it.
But then if we take the flip side of that, and almost an anti-profiling, there are segments of the population that we are pretty sure aren't going to cause us any trouble. And yet we give them the same scrutiny as those that might fall into a high-risk category. Is that just so it doesn't fall, nobody can point the finger and say, well, you were profiling, so we have to use our energy and our resources in a direction we know an 80-year-old woman in her wheelchair is probably not going to blow up a plane, but we have to put her through the same inconvenience.
Look at Timothy McVeigh. He was a domestic terrorist, but a terrorist nonetheless.
Decorated soldier.
Decorated soldier. Clean-cut, American-looking young man. How would you know? I mean, what does the face of a terrorist look like
but
today?
Are your TSA officers really paying that much attention then when they're searching the people that don't fall within the...
But the bad guys are looking for that one thing that they think can get by. And if they know that the 80-year-old grandma in the wheelchair never gets searched, that's going to be the weakness that they see in the system.
It's a transaction cost. Anytime you adopt any type of government regulation, there's a transaction cost. I think one of the myths when you go through a line of security at the airport is the assumption that that is the only security process that you're being subjected to. That's part of a security process. And in fact, if you want to do the comparison with the Israeli model, the strength of the Israeli model is that you don't even realize you're being subjected to security screening as you go through the process. It's very subtle. There's some questioning that occurs. It occurs with everybody. And then there's some redirection. And then, and if you go to Israel, you go through very long hallways. And it's anybody who has any background with security knows that there's monitoring going on. You don't know it. They are going through a process. Now, you get to the thing that surprised me the first time I went through is you get to the gate with the metal detector, and it's all very fast. And so it's natural to think, wow, where is all the security? It's there. You just don't see it. I think, and I recently took my mother to the airport, and she has to go in a wheelchair, electric scooter, and she got subjected to the additional scrutiny of the screening. And there's a natural frustration that comes with it. I was telling your guest that when I was in the Army, I had a military ID, I was on active duty, and I would randomly get enhanced screening, and I'd go to the TSA agent, I'd say, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I don't think I'm a threat. Yeah. But randomness creates deterrence. The more you reveal your pattern, the less deterrence you have. It's no different than a sobriety checkpoint. Yeah. Right? You go to a sobriety checkpoint, the whole idea is not that you know who to look for. It's to tell the public, because you don't know what we're looking for, you might get caught up in it. So if I'm in that line and I see an old lady go through security, how do I know that it might not be the fifth person or the sixth person or the eighth person? And that creates uncertainty.
And as he was mentioning, he's a lieutenant colonel in the Army, so he should be not suspicioned. But then we look at Major Hassan, who committed mass murder at Fort Hood. We look at the Timothy McVeigh. So there is no guaranteed non-profile.
Although we trust all of our elected officials, when they go through the airport, they're subjected to the same process as everyone else.
Okay, so the whole other side of this whole conversation, for the majority of people that are watching this at home, and I would hope everyone that's watching this, they're not going to be a problem. What can they do going to the airport to make the experience easier, more convenient? What things should they have, shouldn't they have? I know in our opening package we mentioned nail clippers, and now nail clippers are fine to bring on again.
Yes, you can bring nail clippers. That has been changed. Certainly you wouldn't want a nail clipper that was 10 or 11 inches long, but the standard nail clipper you would carry with you is okay to take through the checkpoint now. That really hasn't changed substantially, Ernie. You can still show up at the checkpoint with your checked bags. Your laptop still comes out of the bag and goes through in a separate bin. What people can be ready for is anticipate that when you get there, you're going to have to take your shoes off. That hasn't changed. Just be as patient as you possibly can. Get there a little early. Try to avoid being there at the last minute where you're frustrated with rushing through that checkpoint, because sometimes you'll breeze right through there and it's very unpredictable. Certain times of the day, obviously, airlines have more flights than others, and there's going to be times when lines will be very long. Holiday times are really stressful for people. But when you get to the airport, get there early and just have that cooperative attitude. Yeah, they're going to look at your documentation. They're going to check your boarding pass. They're going to look at your ID. They're going to put you through that X-ray machine as quickly as possible based on the traffic's there. You're still allowed to carry a quart-sized Ziploc bag with you, and you can have liquids in that bag up to 3 ounces.
3 ounces total, or 3 ounces each one?
Per small item, and no more than that. People have often come to the checkpoint with well, this is a 6-ounce bottle, but it's only got this much in it. Well, they won't let you through with that because the capacity has to be only not more than 3 ounces. So we would ask people to be understanding of it. And I think for the most part, people are. They come to the airports. They're very cooperative. I think the TSA agents have a very serious job to do. I think they do it very well. They screen people adequately, professionally, and try to move them through there as quickly to get them to their flight. That's what they're doing.
Now, I know we're running short on time, so I want to get to this area. Sure. Once you get on the flight, and we were all talking before we started the show today, we have all seen things on a flight.
Yes.
And I'm going to turn this over to Sandy. When you're on a flight, what should you as an individual customer, flyer in this situation, passenger, be looking for, be aware of, and what can you really do in these situations?
Well, first off, you're exactly right. Just be aware of your surroundings. A famous law enforcement instructor years ago, a guy named Jeff Cooper, came up with a color code system, much like TSA uses today. In fact, they may have even copied him. I don't know. But there's a situational awareness, as the military would call it. Just be aware who's around you. Be observant. Notice things. Now, if you see something, say something, but obviously there's some common sense that's got to be involved there. At what point do you act on your suspicions?
Right.
And that's where it comes down to good judgment. But I think I would not be so alarming that because someone is standing in the aisle and refuses to sit down. There's a series of procedures. Unless it's something that's just overwhelming, like his pants are catching on fire, well then obviously a little common sense in there. Yeah. But if someone's just acting suspiciously, bring it to the attention of the flight attendant. Bring it to the attention of someone in authority. Now, having said that, if it is so dramatic that you feel like you have to take action, understand that there may be law enforcement on that plane. There may be air marshals. And if you're taking action and that air marshal is responding to what he perceives, he doesn't know you. And you may also become a victim yourself. Because one of the things I actually used to train the air marshals as to what would happen if SWAT had to come in on the aircraft, an aircraft assault. And if you're on that plane, we're trying to perceive threat from or friend from foe. And any actions may be misperceived or
I don't know if
incorrectly.
This can be answered or not. If there is an air marshal on a flight and an incident begins to ensue, is there any way we as passengers will know that they are there? Is there a certain point at which they get involved, and if it gets past that point, you should know you should do something, or is it just you?
Well, if they take action, they're immediately going to identify themselves.
Yes, they will. They'll identify themselves, and when they do that, then you should get out of the way.
But up until then, their mission is to stay covert, to not be recognized.
Are we past the point of having flight attendants on flights and should just have security agents on flights? Wouldn't it make more sense? I mean, do I really need someone to bring me a bag of peanuts, or do I need someone who's there who is a security expert watching the flight?
Well, although there may be some credit to that, the fact that they are recognized and they know they're law enforcement, they're the first person they're going to defeat. The advantage the air marshal has is that no one knows who they are. So when they have the element of surprise when they take action.
And I want to say, I meant no offense to flight attendants. They do a lot more than just bring you a bag of peanuts. They have extensive training also in first aid and in security and all of that. So
well, you started the program with the question, are we safer now than we were on 9/11? And we have the high-profile incident of one individual who defeats a security screening process, and then a passenger, using good judgment, decides to respond when something doesn't seem right. He's trying to set his underwear on fire or whatever was happening, or set himself on fire. But in fact, if you think about the volume of air traffic that occurs in this country year after year, and the fact that touch wood, there has not been another major terrorist attack on an airliner, I think people, when they get on an airplane, like when they get on the highway, they know, maybe not obviously, but subconsciously, there's a little bit of an assumption of risk. We live in a world where there is a transnational fundamentalist enemy that will try persistently to cause harm to American people. That is the reality of our contemporary environment. Mm-hmm. And to me, the analogy with Israel that's much more appropriate is that people talk about the Israeli airport, but if you go to Israel and you watch the way the Israelis get about their daily lives, they know there's risk around them, but they don't let it destroy their ability to live a full, free, normal existence. And they accept that risk because they've made the judgment that they could turn their country into a fortress, but then they would lose their own cultural ethos.
And I think we're going to lose our time right now. Wonderful place to end, but we've got to end it right now. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Now, each week we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Simply click on the local programs bar, then pick Houston 8, and you can join our online community. You can read about the guests, learn more about the topic, share your thoughts and ideas, and even suggest questions that we might ask during upcoming episodes. Remember, information posted on our website may be used on air, so keep that in mind when submitting. That does it for us tonight. Until next week, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for watching, and have a great week.